Hello, and welcome to Why Do We Do That? A psychology podcast that deconstructs human behavior from the perspectives of social scientists, psychologists, and others that use applied psychology in their work. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Moyer. In this episode, I sat down with philosopher and writer Rebecca Newberger Goldstein to discuss her new book, The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. Rebecca holds a PhD in philosophy of science from Princeton University and has taught at Yale, Columbia, NYU, Dartmouth, and Harvard. A fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, her work has been supported by the MacArthur Genius Grant and fellowships from the Guggenheim, Whitting Institute, Radcliffe Institute, Council of Learned Societies, and the National Science Foundation. In 2015, she was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Obama. She is the author of 10 books of acclaimed fiction and nonfiction, including 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, a work of fiction, and Betraying Spinoza, the renegade Jew who gave us modernity. One of the most powerful takeaways from my conversation with Rebecca was the central role the human desire to matter plays in shaping our lives. The longing to be seen as significant, to know that our existence has weight in the eyes of others, is one of the deepest forces guiding our decisions and behaviors. While it is not the only driver of human action, it appears essential to living a flourishing life. If we neglect this instinct in favor of short-term comforts or distractions, we risk feeling adrift. Rebecca refers to the pursuits that satisfy this instinct as mattering projects, and their form varies widely. For some, it may be a solitary pursuit, an intellectual, artistic, or athletic endeavor. For others, it may be relational, being a devoted friend, a present parent, or a committed member of a community. We need not overcomplicate the search. The task is simply to identify something that feels worthy of our devotion and lean into it wholeheartedly. Equally important was Rebecca's caution about the darker side of mattering. Some mattering projects can place us in opposition to others. Political or religious identities, while capable of offering meaning, structure, and moral clarity, can easily become all-consuming. When every interaction becomes an opportunity to defend our worldview, we risk losing sight of a fundamental truth. We are social beings who must coexist amid differences. Our drive to matter should never require us to conclude that others do not. If you've ever felt that your life lacks purpose or meaning, I hope this conversation draws your attention to the deep, universal instinct to matter and encourages you to pursue it in ways that enrich not only your life, but the lives of those around you. Enjoy. Okay, today I'm joined by Rebecca Newberger Goldstein. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Rebecca has very recently released a book called The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. I really enjoyed reading it. It was I would say it was an ambitious topic. You really make this strong case that human motivation can be distilled down to this single word of mattering. And as I was reading it, all kinds of other words popped in my head. Things like meaning, things like connection, even just plain old survival, when you're talking about distilling down the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you choose mattering?
I love that word, mattering. And I think the quickest way to sum up what we humans, are creatures of matter who long to matter. And I think that gets all of the poignancy and the burden, the difficulty, the value of being human, the something special of being human. I don't think it's the only motive, that it's the only deepest motive, the cornerstone of a fulfilling life, a flourishing life. I think connection, connectedness, which you've mentioned, is also absolutely fundamental to us. A sense that there are certain people in our lives who will pay us special attention, whether we deserve it or not. It's not a notion of having to earn this attention with those who are in our lives, typically our family, our friends, our lovers, our perhaps our community members, our neighbors, our colleagues. And it's not necessarily that you love them or that they love you, but they're in your life, and that they are paying attention to you, and hopefully, yeah, you are paying attention to them as well. Although sometimes it only goes one way. There are certain people who are only looking for the attention and not really giving it. In any case, and so I put that as one of our deepest motivations. We are gregarious. It is simply to say we are gregarious creatures, evolved from gregarious creatures. I've spent a lot of time in Africa with the chimpanzees, and I see a lot of us in the chimpanzees. But there is another motive that I never saw in the chimpanzees. I've never seen in other of our close primate relatives. And that is what I capture with mattering. And it also has to do with attention. It has to do with the longing to feel that we are deserving of all the attention that we give ourselves. That we give ourselves, all living things that have attention, spend the bulk of their attention on themselves. And that's scientific. That can be derived from the laws of nature that made us. And that's one of the things I go into in the book. But we are creatures who not only pay an enormous amount of attention to ourselves, have to, in order to pursue our lives, a very complicated thing to pursue a human life, but we actually ask for a reason for it. That are we truly deserving of all the attention that we pay ourselves? We go about trying to justify ourselves, to show that we really do objectively matter, and that objective mattering justifies our self-mattering. So not only are we working according to the laws of nature, but we want a justification in our own case for those laws of nature. In other words, it's really hard to be human. It's really, you're taking on an extra burden. It's what makes us the values-seeking creatures that we are, the normative creatures, the justificatory creatures, and the really interesting, complicated, perplexing creatures that we are.
So, as you were giving this description, I was, thinking like, do we have more in common with our pre-human ancestors, or is this book about just how different we are? Because, as you were saying, like, and you actually mentioned this in the book, like, animals don't do a lot of pondering about their existence, right? They're very
right.
much on autopilot. They're very, much on primitive instincts, whereas at least one of the unique things about being human is that we have this introspection.
That's right.
Could you talk
That's
a
right.
little bit more about what makes us human? What is the part of our brain, or perhaps the mechanism that pushes us towards looking to see what matters?
Exactly. So, yes, and I do think that we are unique in this regard, for better or for worse. Our greatest achievements come from this. The greatest atrocities come from this, and I hope we'll get around to talking about that, because it can go there. There's something I would say noble about this aspect of ourselves. There's a certain dignity when we talk about the intrinsic dignity of being human, a very vague notion. I think the way to sharpen it up is in terms of this longing that we have. And I call it a longing because it's always a longing. We never know for sure. We're always uncertain about it. And so it can be never be laid to rest. Again, increasing the difficulty and the poignancy of being human. I should just say, and this is one of the major things I try to get across, that it's hard to be human, and we should have great sympathy for one another, compassion and generosity, even when it goes very wrong, when the values adopted in order to justify a life are bad values that lead to misery, that we should be maximally sympathetic of other human beings and trying to help out as much as possible. I mean, there are ethical implications, and that's so very important to me that the book ends with ethical implications that could take in all of us, no matter where we are on what I call the Mattering map. But yeah, it's I call it an instinct, and I explain in the book, it's not strictly speaking, scientifically speaking, an instinct. The self-mattering, the feeling ourselves by default deserving of the bulk of our attention, and that is an instinctual. It's even deeper than the instincts, I argue in the book. It's the organizing principle of all of the instincts that a human, not a human, a creature, a living biological creature is going to be putting most of their energy that they need to take in order to resist entropy, to resist the disorder to which all systems are headed. They're putting that energy to work for themselves in survival and flourishing. And that is just that self mattering, that putting oneself first is mandated by biology itself, and the biological laws that derive ultimately from the physical laws, physics, especially second law of thermodynamics. But so that the self-mattering, as I say, it's even deeper than an instinct. It's the organizing principles of the instincts. We have also evolved for adaptive purposes. We can tell the evolutionary story. We've evolved the capacity for self-reflection. We evolved, being the gregarious creatures we are, we evolved a very well-developed theory of mind, as the psychologists call it. It's very confusing for philosophers because we use theory of mind in a different way. I was just talking to a philosopher last night about what do the psychologists mean by theory of mind? They mean the ability to read, to interpret, to infer what it's like to be other human beings, which we recognize is different from our own inner world. And we recognize this as a very early age. Toddlers are recognizing that other human beings have beliefs and desires that are different from their own, which is really fascinating. Well, we can turn that very developed theory of mind that we develop with these enormously complicated brains of ours on ourselves, and look at ourselves as almost like another mind that we can explore, interrogate, discover new things. You know, that's what therapy is all about. You're discovering new things about yourself. And it's the combination of these two things that give us the mattering instinct, the longing to matter, which we interrogate our own self-mattering. Am I really worth it? Am I really worth all of this effort and all of this attention that I put into myself? I understand that I can understand that that is determined by the laws that made me, but yet, you know, there's a kind of unease when you look at this. If the way we measure how much something matters is how much attention we give to it, then
Mhm.
it would seem that each of us thinks, uh, are determined to think that we are the thing that matters the most in all the universe because we give ourselves so much very attention, incessant, obsessive attention. Um, and when you look at that in this self-interrogation that we are capable of, it causes an unease, and there's a sort of desire to, no, I really am worth it. There's something about me. I am living my life in such a way that I am deserving of all of this attention. And that's what I call the longing to matter. And so it's more complicated than
Mhm.
than an instinct, but it is the combination of trying to rationalize our own self-mattering.
Yeah.
That's really how it comes about.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes more sense to me when you look at just development from an infant to an adult. This idea that, right, as an infant, imagine living in a tribal community. There are lots of infants, and if you look at it from the perspective of survival for a group of infants, the ones that engage in more automatic behaviors that get the attention and
Yeah,
deservingness of their parents are going to be more likely to survive,
yeah,
right? If there's an infant that is not behaving in a way that gets their parents' attention, there's a possibility that they're not going to get fed, they're not going to get their needs met, and so on and so forth. And then it kind of feels low, though, as children develop into adolescence and adults, that you mentioned that, gosh, we sometimes this ends up manifesting as we think we are the center of the universe. At
yeah,
some point, there's like a group that you start to realize that you're not the center of the universe. At least it's probably beneficial that you realize you're not the center of the universe,
yeah,
in the sense
yeah.
that if you don't, you will not expand into a social network, right?
That's right. The universe is going to disappoint you most likely and not circling around you as you expected to do. I mean, but and we can look at certain people who continue to think or to need to think that the universe circles around them, that everything circles around them, and they are socially maladaptive. We call them narcissists or malignant narcissists sometimes.
But
But things go
they've
wrong.
achieved mattering, right? So
But they
is
are
it
so needy. Imagine. I don't know if you want to get political, but of course, I don't know if you are thinking of a particular person right now, but I am thinking of a particular person right now. Somebody who wants all of us to be thinking of him all the time. That's what his mattering requires. He has to be colonizing the attention not only of his fellow American citizens, but of all the world. Look at how I think I don't have to name who this is, but um, all the world is thinking of him, and he behaves in such a way that all the world is constantly thinking, if the attention goes off him at all, we'll do something to bring the attention back on him. And it's a fascinating example,
Yeah,
as somebody who's interested in the mattering instinct. I mean, I am both appalled by what's going on, but also it's such a fascinating example of when somebody has never really caught on to the fact, or who's never, it's not the fact, it's the psychological need. It's something so much deeper
yeah,
than cognition, but a great need to be constantly reassured by the attention that everybody is paying him, that he matters.
yeah.
I mean, he's a real extreme type, but yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
why I got off on that. I was reading
no,
the
I think
newspaper today. That's
sure.
why.
Yeah, no, I think
Yes.
it's fitting, especially, you know, I, as I was reading the book, I looked at it through the lens of self-esteem, because that's I have a
Uh-huh.
lot of
It's very
experience
closely, yes,
in
yes.
that background where everyone has a sense of self-worth that is fostered by your parents. Feeling that you are worthy of attention by your parents, and um, but self-esteem is not something that is optimal when it is super high. It's
Yes,
probably optimal when it's adequate, right? So in
that's
the
right.
sense that
Yes,
when we every human seems to be have the ability to flourish when they feel a sense of self-worth. But if they feel that if their sense of self-worth is grandiose, we get
yes,
narcissism, as you kind of pointed out. If
yes,
our self-esteem is too low, which many people suffer from, they
yes.
don't feel worthy of love. They don't feel worthy of attention. And that also can cause, issues, maladaptive
That's
behavior.
depression. Yes. I spent a lot of time talking to very depressed people, and what they say is, "I don't matter."
Right.
That is the paradigmatic statement of depression, and it is, and in fact, the U.S. helpline, suicide prevention helpline, their motto is "You matter." Their website is www.youmatter.gov. I
Right.
mean, it's yes. Now, the interesting thing that it's a different notion, the one that I'm exploring from self-esteem. It's closely related to it. Um, but it is the reason I'm so interested in mattering and this longing that we have is that it motivates uh, behavior, long-term behavior, something that I call mattering projects, that it's realized in we try to do something about this, and that in fact it's an act, whether you have low self-esteem, adequate, too high. I think I've been talking to people about this for over 40 years, and I've never met anybody who didn't know what I was talking about. When I say, what is it that you do, that tries to convince yourself to convince yourself, that you are worthy of getting on with life. And
Right.
there are things that people do. It's not something static. I think how much you have to do might have a lot to do with the original family story, the original family drama. Um, but I think a lot of other things have to do with that as well. Temperament, interests, passions are all expressed in how you shape, how do you get to work on trying to close this gap between how much you seem to matter to yourself and how much you really can claim to matter.
Hmm.
Uh, and so there are, four different strategies that I map out. And so the fact that we get to work with this and we shape our lives according to this is the thing that most interests me. And we do it in such different ways, and the great diversity between us uh, is manifested in how we go about trying to prove to ourselves that we matter in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, so we're definitely going to talk about these different strategies as you lay out in what you call the mattering map. Before we get into that, um, I did want to explore a little bit about what it means to achieve mattering. Um, in the
Well, we
sense
never know if we achieve mattering. Never, never. We
right,
go about it in our different ways. It's
we're
a
just
leap of
kind of,
faith. Yeah.
yeah,
You got to get on with your life.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there is this a bit of you're trying to feel your way through it, and it's a process. It's not something that you achieve, right? Much like happiness, it is a process, not something that you can just go out and get. But I did want to ask, um, to what extent is mattering something that you feel versus, does it have to be objective? I get the, my brain comes up with this analogy, like, take somebody who's a widget builder, and they're told that, if you build these widgets, these are essential to life on the planet. And the person keeps building the widgets because they think it's important to life on the planet. But suppose one day they find out that those widgets are just toys. They're not really essential to life on the
Yeah.
planet. So they've been
Yeah.
spending their whole life making these widgets, and does it, are they still mattering? Or is it all about feeling, or does it have to be objective?
N- There's the feeling, and we need to feel as if we're mattering, and that's all that we know psychologically. Feeling that we matter, and that involves choosing some view, having some view about what it is that matters, and making a life that matters. And we come to very different opinions about that. We can't all be right because they they conflict with each other. Um, but what we are longing for is objective mattering. We never know if we have it, because there are these conflicting views
Hmm.
of what it takes to live a life that matters. There's the religious take on it. There's the achievement take on it. There's the social take on it. There's the competitive take on it. Those are the four different strategies that I found people using. Um, and we disagree, and there's no way to get outside of our minds to test what really constitutes what matters. I think here's something I do want to say. I think that it's true that every human life matters. I think that is the most fundamental truth of moral philosophy, and I think that there are different ways of proving it. I have my way of proving it by way of the mattering instinct. I think that this very longing for objective mattering shows how much we matter, which means, and every moral philosopher who has taken on this question, from Kant to Aristotle, the utilitarians, all and me, all come to the same conclusion. To the extent that any one of us humans matter, we all matter to that same extent. And that is an amazingly important moral principle. We may none of us matter. You, but then we all share in this null mattering. Or we may, I think we do all matter. I think that's, as I said, we're this, taking on this burden, trying to justify ourselves, becoming values-seeking creatures in the effort to establish our objective mattering, even if they're false values, bad values. And I go into a lot of bad values in the book. Nevertheless, that this becoming such creatures who are seeking values in order to justify ourselves, there's something very beautiful about that. There's something noble and dignified about that. And to the extent that all humans do this, I've yet to meet a human who doesn't, unless they're living under extreme difficult circumstances where bare survival is their aim. But give us enough safety, enough stability. We are thinking, what's it all about? Do I have some purpose? Does my life make some sense?
Yeah.
That's amazing. That
Yeah.
is beautiful. That's extraordinary. And I think it shows that there is great value in each human life. That's why it's so tragic when it goes wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. So, uh, Corey Keyes was a previous guest of mine. He's a big figure in the positive psychology movement, arguably made the term flourishing what it is today.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I was interviewing him, and he told that it was a story that he included in his book that he shared with me. I believe I don't think it made it into the cut of the interview, but he was saying how he was wanting to publish this book on flourishing, on human well-being, and as he was writing it, he stumbled upon someone else who had got there before he did.
Yeah.
And it was devastating, right? Because
Yeah.
to him, this was kind of his life's work, and he's putting
Right.
it
It was a
together,
mattering
and
project. Sure. Yeah.
right, and he got very depressed
Yeah.
when he found this out, and he shares this story in the book about how he went to his wife and said, this is I can't believe this. I've been spending my whole life studying this. This is my life's work, and it's just now it's not important. It doesn't matter. And his wife said to him, "But you matter to me.
Yeah.
You're important to me."
Yeah.
And he attributes this sentence that basically saved his life. He was not doing well emotionally.
Yeah.
Do you think that
That's what I would
people,
call connectedness. The
yeah,
other absolute requisite to living a flourishing life,
yeah.
connectedness.
So do you think that people are mistakenly look outward in terms of affecting the world with their intellect and their ideas, and they should be looking more, their immediate circle, their relationships? Like, are we making a mistake often when we
No,
try to
following,
matter by
yeah.
ideas?
But yeah, no, I don't think that the Hungarian woman who developed the COVID vaccine wasted her life. I don't think that Albert Einstein wasted his life, and I don't think that any the people who write novels or poems or tend their gardens. It doesn't have to be something grand. We are of different mattering natures.
Hmm.
We have, so, I gave an argument for why we all matter, but that's not our problem. Our human problem is, but it's me. I am the one who is devoting so much attention to me. Do I deserve this? Don't tell me,
Hmm.
yeah, 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 we all matter. That's not hitting me where I existentially live. That's another word I haven't used yet. This is the existential dimension
Hmm.
of humans that the chimps that I observe don't have. They're not interested in just by do I really deserve that banana? They see the banana, they're going to take it. So um, yeah, there are just we all have that need for connectedness. If that doesn't happen, if there are not people in your life to whom you matter, who if you disappeared from the face of the earth would notice and grieve, miss you, you don't feel like you're living a flourishing life. The name for that kind of misery is loneliness. Loneliness is a misery. Loneliness is not compatible with flourishing. And for some people, the ones I call the socializers, they're having people in their lives to whom they matter not only satisfies their need for connectedness, it satisfies their need for mattering. And so the two different needs are collapsed into one for some people. For other people, that's not how it works. Um, and and you can tell them, well, it ought to work that way. Um, just as people tell you, well, you ought to believe in God, then you will feel like you matter to the cosmos at large. There's no greater sense of mattering. But you can't tell people to matter in the way that you think they ought to matter. That's one of the greatest mistakes we make. And I talk about that a great deal. I call it the urge to universalize. If it, whatever way I go about trying to satisfy my mattering, and it works so well for me, but if it's not working for you, then maybe I'm wrong, and I can't tolerate the thought of that. So I've got to say that you're wrong, and therein grow the ill fruits of intolerance, right? So the poisonous fruits, I should say, of intolerance. So, this is a lot of good and a lot of bad comes
Hmm.
from our mattering instinct. But no, I mean,
Yeah.
it just, there are different ways that people go about it. And this comes from deep in what's individual in them. And it is our diversity. And I think we have got to accept this diversity.
Yeah.
Stop wishing that everybody was just like us.
Yeah, I as I was going through the four strategies that you kind of lay out, so which heroic, striving, socializers, competitors, and transcenders. Um, I definitely had this urge to apply judgment, which you actually mention in the book. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
tempting to do this, to
It
say like, well,
is. Yeah,
that's, why, we don't do a very good job at understanding why things are important to other people, basically, if, especially the further away on that map they are, right?
exactly. But damn, it's so
Yeah,
interesting, just for the
sure.
intellectual curiosity. I mean, I'll give you a story. I was waiting for a friend. This was some years ago, waiting for a friend in a lobby in a Manhattan hotel. And my friend is always late and I'm always early. And so some guy comes over to me and he's trying to pick me up. And I started talking to him about mattering. And it turned out, and people love it because it makes them feel like they matter so much. I want to hear your story. I want to know
Yeah.
how you go about this and how you shape your life in trying to prove to yourself that you matter. And he was a pickup artist. He was he was a pickup artist, and he explained it. He had his stats. He told me the rules of the game. It got him up in the morning. It was his reason, and the more women he could pick up, um, the more he felt he mattered, and that's how he went about. And to me, it was fascinating. I mean, he didn't get from me exactly what he wanted from me. He didn't
Right.
get to pick me up, but I think he had a very good time. Well, he had a good time because I was paying so much attention to him, and was in fact fascinated. But to me, I mean, this is unbelievably interesting. The same longing that I recognize in myself, I can recognize so far in everybody I've spoken to, except those who are under extreme duress,
Yeah.
just worrying about the survival of themselves and their family.
Yeah. Well, now that I've heard this story, I think I'm gonna have to be judgy because that sound the pickup artist. I would say that they are missing something, and it's kind of like they're artificially trying to fill the meaning hole or the
Oh, I
the
think,
mattering hole. Yeah.
so we can go and talk about, how I see the differences between those who are going about it um, in constructive, creative ways and those who are going about it in destructive ways. And so, yes, for sure, destructive to the person themselves, perhaps, and destructive to others. So, yeah, sure, I'm not a moral relativist. I don't accept
Sure.
everybody, but I want to understand everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Let's
How do
talk
we
more
go
about
about,
that.
yeah,
Let's talk
yeah.
more about that because
How
you
do we
devote.
go about trying to change things if we don't understand them,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you devote a whole chapter to mattering, and how it can lead you down a dangerous path. Could you just
Yeah.
talk high level about, we have this desire to matter, and clearly there are paths that are suboptimal. Could you just talk a little bit about that
Sure,
section?
sure. I mean, there are suboptimal, like it could be suboptimal to the person themselves. And I have, you pick, what I call a mattering project. Um, for reasons, I mean, there are all sorts of reasons that you might pick it, and maybe it's not suitable for you. For example, as a professor, the worst part, I think, of being a professor is sometimes people enter graduate school and they've done well in their undergraduate classes, but then, they start to do the research, so try to fulfill the requirements, um, and and they discover that they're not really made for this, and they may be in denial because they feel that this is the only thing that matters.
Hmm.
I've met people, certainly in philosophy, that this is the highest thing. This is the only thing that matters. My dad was a philosopher. He always wanted me to be a philosopher. He told me that was the only thing. The unexamined life is not worth living, blah, 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 And they're not going, I Now, I may be wrong. We make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but I have the responsibility of trying to judge, is this person in for a life of frustration and disappointment? Are
Mm.
they going to, and it's the worst. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how much I agonize over it when and talk to other professors, and um when you feel like, look, maybe this is not for you. And I tell this story in the book of a very dear friend of mine who had to face in his own career, which was he was a classical guitarist and he had done extremely well. He was in a very high-end conservatory, but he couldn't make a go of it. And it's very the the resources for a classical guitarist are very small. They're not hired by orchestras. You have to be a soloist or just play for weddings, And he had to, at a certain point, realize this is not going to work for him. And there's a lot of luck involved. A lot of people make it who ought not to make it, and you're filled with outrage. And if your mattering project is causing you more grief than fulfillment, um, then perhaps you ought to rethink it. And he did. He did rethink it, and he became a heroic striver of a different kind. He's a writer, and he got a doctorate in comparative literature, and he has his frustrations and his disappointments, but he's making progress in his life. It's a life of flourishing. And it, some of these mattering projects will set you up for a lot of disappointment and frustration and suffering. It's really about life satisfaction, what psychologists call life satisfaction or flourishing, or what the ancient Greeks had called eudaimonia,
Hmm.
which is not exactly episodic happiness. Eudaimonia can tolerate a lot of frustration and a lot of misery. I mean, yeah, I told a lot of stories about that. But okay, so a person may not be meeting their mattering instinct in a way that's good for them. They may not be meeting their mattering instinct in a way that's bad for others. And now we get into morality, into ethics. If I decide that what I need in order to feel that I matter is to invade Poland, well,
Right.
um, I
Or
must be
shoot
stopped.
up a school, right?
Exactly. Or shoot up a school. We see this so much. Then I must be stopped, right? Because of that fundamental truth, which is that all lives matter. If you are making other lives worse by your mattering project, no matter how good it makes you feel, you ought not to be doing it. Ought not to be doing it. That's a moral term, and we have to find ways to change you. I don't, when it happens in big ways on the world stage, historically, when I talk about atrocities, I talk about a neo-Nazi skinhead that I became very good friends with to this day. And but I also talk about, another story that came out of my life or knowing people about a love bomber whose sense of mattering required very intense, romantic, operatically. They were like operas, his love affairs, so intensive. Um, but it was one after another. He needed to get complete power over a young woman, and one of whom I knew very well, and so know the story from the inside very, very well. And but then at a certain point, he had proved how much he mattered when he had made all of her other relationships with her family, with her friends, with her professors of no account to her. She was fixated on him. At that point, he left, and she discovered that her grand love affair had begun at the expense of another young woman, and another young woman took over after he left her. He was a love bomber,
Yeah.
and the attention that he gave her was just amazing. It sounded like the perfect love affair. There were so many, so there were ways that people tried to go about um, fulfilling this mattering instinct, power over others, dominance. Um, it's that are or dominance over the world. It can be large, it can be small, that are unhealthy for others. So there are two ways that it can go wrong: unhealthy
Yeah.
for yourself, unhealthy for others.
So I guess to wrap up, this is more nuanced. So if we know that there are ways that mattering projects that could be harmful to ourselves, to others, there's kind of a gray area, which is a mattering project that maybe you think is good for you, but if you were to ask your close peers, they would be like, no, that's not for you. Um, let's end on some practical advice. So
Yes,
someone that is kind of in limbo, maybe they don't feel like they have any mattering
yes,
projects.
yes.
What would you say is a good recipe for choosing a mattering project?
Yes. Um, Again, I have dealt with this, with students who are stuck, and they're often extremely talented. They have too many talents. It can go in many different directions. I tell the story of William James, and his Great Depression, because he was too talented, this man. He was an artist, he was a scientist, he was a philosopher, he was a psychologist, and he was stuck and he was depressed, truly depressed, lay in bed for months on end, contemplating suicide, as his sister Alice did. And he was able to find his way. And for him, he says it was an act of will. He knew that he had to concentrate his talents on and his energy and his life force on something. And that is the first thing I would say. And don't make your choice be one. You can be so influenced by the values of society, by status, by your parents, by your culture, by be very sure that this is something that is coming from you, from deep in you, from your real interests, that will make you want to get up in the morning and get to life, to get on with it. And so, so many of us are, too influenced by what others value, especially if they are authority figures, especially if they are people whom we value. And so that's the first thing I would say. You've not to choose is to choose. It's to choose a life of sadness, really, of sorrow, of waste. So you must choose. And choosing means giving up other things. And that's difficult, but that's life. That's the way life is. Yes. If I had my choice, it would be I would be playing center forward in the New York Knicks if I had my choice. I would love to be, I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world to be a basketball player and to fly towards the hoop. Yeah, I'm 5'2" and I have very little talent in that direction. I use what talents I have in the best way that I can. And that's what we have to do. So that's the first thing I would say. And and always be open to, is this really working for me? Don't get caught up in the fallacy of sunk costs. Well, I've already sunk so much into this, I have to keep going. Y- Your own sense of flourishing is giving you, it's a barometer. It's giving you the most important information that you can. And yes, there can be misery in everything we do. There can be difficulties, setbacks, drawbacks. But so, you know, that shouldn't dissuade you. Um, but um, but ongoing uh, ongoing misery, unrelieved misery, bordering on depression, that's important information. That's extremely important information. As loneliness is to connectedness or belonging, that great need of ours. So a depression is to the mattering instinct. It's a sign.
Well, the name of the book is The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. Thank you so much for joining me, Rebecca Newberger Goldstein.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
For more on Rebecca, visit her Substack, The Mattering Map, at RebeccaNewbergerGoldstein.substack.com. Or pick up a copy of The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us, wherever books are sold. If you enjoy this podcast, please share an episode with 2 of your friends. Head over to patreon.com/whydowethatpodcast to become a paid supporter of the show. You'll gain early access to episodes as well as bonus video content. Follow on Instagram or Facebook at Why Do We Do That Podcast, or on X at WDWDTpod. Until next time, this is Dr. Ryan Moyer, hoping you found some answers to the question, why do we do that?